coming in on a wing and a prayer, coming in on a wing and a prayer. Though there's one motor gone, we can still carry on, coming in on a wing and a prayer. What a show, what a fight. Yes, we really hit our target for tonight. How we sing as we limp through the air. Oh, look below, there's our field over there. With our full crew aboard and our trust in the Lord, we're coming in on a wing and a prayer. One of our planes was missing.
He joined the Air Force in 1942 when he got out of high school. He was 18 and went in to become a pilot training. And probably 42, 43, probably a good year and a half, maybe more, he was in pilot training. He was in different air bases going around learning how to fly an airplane, you know. But it turns out he got hooked up with a bomber type airplane. Back then they had two types of bombers. They had a B-17 Super Fortress that flew over Europe a lot, and then he was in the B-24 Liberator. He was in the China, Burma, India theater of war. That, if you know where Japan is, they're like almost next to it. So he was on bombing missions. He flew over the Himalayas to where, because the Japanese invaded China, so they had bases over in China. They was thinking they could take over China, and they would fly over and locate the bases to where they could bomb them, and had like 29 missions there up until 1945 when the war basically ended and he got discharged. Well, back then it was either that or you was going to get drafted. You ever heard of the draft?
Yeah.
The draft is where they record everybody's name and age and decide when they're going to be drafted. He didn't want to be drafted into the Army, so he chose to go into the Air Force, which turned out pretty good for him. Well, this is some of the things that we're talking about that was going on during World War II, you know, in civilian, but like back home around here.
Yeah.
This happened to be a war ration book. What they did, the government rationed many things like gasoline, tires, and cars weren't being produced because the car plant shut down. There were no cars. Just stuff like that was hard to get. Coffee and sugar and that stuff like that. You had a book, a ration book, and you can look in there. For example, this happened. This wasn't ours. We dug this out of.
This was my grandma's.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like they're kind of like food stamps.
Huh?
They're kind of like food stamps.
Yeah.
Well,
in a
you're
sense.
limited, yeah.
Yeah,
you
were
have to
limited.
have one of those to get sugar.
You could only during the war, and they didn't. People could only drive 35 miles an hour to save, you know, on tires and gasoline, and you didn't get much gasoline, so people didn't do much traveling. One of the things they did were, besides rationing, and you were only allowed to drive 35 miles an hour, and you couldn't buy a new car. Between 1941, I think, was the last. All the car plants shut down and just started building tanks and ships and vehicles that whatever they needed for the war had a benefit, plus bombs naturally.
Did you work in a factory?
I did I was about 14 years old, and they were hiring just kids out of school, that age coming in, we built boxes. And those boxes were going to carry the bombs to wherever they were going. And so a lot of products needed to be built towards the war, and that every plant you could think of, and women went to work because all the men were going into service.
Coming in on a wing and a prayer, coming in on a wing and a prayer. Though there's one motor gone, we can still